If you want to learn to write songs like Radiohead, Elliott Smith, Chopin, or Frank Ocean, stay tuned. I've been in songwriting workshops and I've heard it said that you don't need to know music theory to write a great song. While this is true, you can write an infinite number of songs with just C, G, and D. 1-4-5, the diatonic scale. And I guarantee there will continue to be great songs written in 1-4-5 and 2-6-1 till the end of time, because those common chord progressions never go away. That's just how music works. There's so many undiscovered styles and textures that you can achieve with just a simple diatonic song structure. But here's the thing, those songs will always have a certain sound. You're only going to be able to write one type of song if you just stick the diatonic scale. That means songs with chords in the key that you're playing in, without using any chords that are outside of the key. If you just stick to diatonic structure, you'll never be able to write a song like Frank Ocean, Radiohead, Chopin, or Elliott Smith. I've always been obsessed with these artists, and I've always wondered what it is about these artists that sets them apart. Why do their songs sound so different? It's because they all used borrowed chords. As I started to dig in and try to figure out what borrowed chords are, I discovered the circle of thirds. And the circle of thirds is the perfect way to think about borrowed chords. I want to explain how you can use the circle of thirds to see a visual map of how you can write a song with borrowed chords. When you start using borrowed chords, you think, well, can I just use any other chord from any other key all willy-nilly? No, you can't. There's rules to it. You can't just stick any chord into any key. So I want to explain what I've learned, and then I'm going to do an analysis of a song to show you how it all works. When I started digging in and really learning about borrowed chords, I found that the circle of thirds is a good way to visualize them. You've probably heard of the circle of fifths, and that's useful in its own way, but I'm going to focus on the circle of thirds here. So let's start with a simple chord. I'm going to use the key of our friend C major because it has no sharps or flats, and it's all the white keys. So you can see the chord is made up of the 1, the 3, and the 5. And each note is separated by either 3 or 4 half steps. So these are the chords of the diatonic scale in the key of C. We'll go C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, and then back to C major. So now that we've established that chords are just made up of thirds, what would happen if we took a chord and we just kept adding thirds to it? So let's start at C major, 1, 3, 5, and if we add a 7, it becomes a C major 7 chord. C, E, G, B. Now let's add another third. Now we have the 9th, which is also the 2nd. And then we add another third. That's the 11th, which is also the 4th, and then another third, which is the 13th, also the 6th. And you can see we've totally looped back around. By going up by thirds on the scale loops back into itself. So we can make that circle like this. Now what I want you to realize, and another way to think about this, is that each chord is kind of part of a larger chord. So we can think of all chords being part of one chord. And we can think of moving from chord to chord as just moving to different sections within this larger chord. And what you realize with that is that chords that are close to each other, adjacent to each other on the circle of thirds, share a similar sound profile. So that means these chords can often be interchangeable. So you'll notice that an A minor and an E minor will have similar sounds to a C major because they share 2 notes. An A minor shares 2 notes with a C major, and an E minor shares 2 notes with a C major. So when you're choosing chords, if you interchange an E minor or an A minor where a C major was in a song, you'll notice that they have similar tonal qualities, and that allows this interchange to happen. Let me demonstrate. Here's an F to a C. And then if I go instead an F major to an E minor, there's 2 notes shared, so there's a similar tonal quality. Obviously it changes with that 3rd note. Here's an F to an A minor. one added note changes something about the chord, but it also shares something about the C major. What happens if we go from an F major to a D minor? The D minor shares no tonal quality with the C major, but it shares two notes with the F. So it's more similar to the F sound. It's almost like it's staying on that same side of the tone instead of moving to an opposite tone. So I want you to start thinking of chords in this way. Adjacent chords have similar tones, while the chord that's far away in the circle of thirds are ways to achieve a shift in tone. And let's go one step further and add the half steps between each third. You can see it alternates, 3, 4, 3, 4. But then it does something weird here when we get to the diminished chord, the seventh in the chord, the B diminished. It is 3 and 3. What if we change this circle to reflect those distances? As in, I made the lines that are 3 half steps smaller than the lines that are 4 half steps. Well, I'll get a shape sort of like this. Now, some of you may be thinking, I didn't come here for a geometry lesson, but just please stay with me on this. I'm gonna get to why this applies to artists like Frank Ocean, Chopin, Radiohead, and Elliott Smith in a bit. First of all, you start to notice some patterns when you look at this shape. You'll notice that all major chords start with a 4 half-step interval for the first 2 notes, and then a 3 half-step interval for the last 2 notes, while all minor chords start with a 3 half-step interval and then a 4 half-step interval. You'll notice that the major chords, C major, F major, and G major, the 1, 4, 5, all form a triangle. It's the same with the minor chords. E minor, D minor, and A minor form a triangle. Now when you create or you analyze a chord progression, I want you to look at the chord progressions in relation to this picture. Imagine chords going from adjacent or similar tonal qualities, the chords next to each other, shifting to the opposite end of the circle of thirds to achieve different tonal qualities. So let's think of it all as like one giant chord, and as you move from chord to chord, you're moving from tones that are either similar or dissimilar. Why does it help to think about chords this way? Well, suddenly not only do you understand the interchangeability of chords, you also start to see chord changes as the movement between distances. To get a tonal change in your song, if you're on one chord, you want to choose the next chord that's a further distance from the first chord. Let's do some more examples. I'm going to use some chords that are adjacent to each other. C, E minor, and G are adjacent to each other on this circle. So let's play that progression. So we're on the same side of the circle. Now let's go to the opposite end of the circle, to an F. You can hear a tonal shift. Let's try an example with A minor, C, and E minor. So here we go. Similar tones. We're sharing a similar tone profile. Now I'm going to go to the opposite. Did you hear that? It's shifting. One last example. We'll move to this side of the circle and do an A minor, F, D minor progression. And then we want to shift to the opposite end of the circle by going to E minor or G. So let's try that. Shift. Okay, now the G. So start thinking about chords as adjacent or opposite, and it's going to make a world of a difference in your chord progressions. Now, what about key changes? You'll notice that the 7th note, the B in this case, the B diminished chord, is made up of 3 half steps and 3 half steps. it creates an asymmetry and an unevenness in the diatonic scale. This unevenness is what creates the shift into other keys. If we didn't have that 7th chord, maybe the chords would be perfectly balanced and all music might be in one key. But because of this innate instability in the chords, this is the magic ingredient that allows us to change keys and ultimately use borrowed chords. This is the secret that's going to allow us to break out of the diatonic scale and move into other keys. So earlier I showed you how this circle of thirds alternates between 3 half steps and 4 half steps until we get to the diminished chord, which is 3 and 3. But what would the circle look like if we just kept going 3, 4, 3, 4? Well, we would get a true circle of thirds, a perfect circle of thirds that contains every single note of the chromatic scale. And here it is. So, what do you notice with the chromatic circle of thirds? You'll notice that the rules of adjacent and opposite work when you try to borrow a chord from another key. And the only way to really understand this is to analyze a song. And so I'm going to do a quick analysis of Alameda by Elliott Smith. But this video is getting a little long, and I'd like to do more videos where I analyze songs using this method. So comment below if you want me to analyze particular songs and songs of Frank Ocean or Radiohead or Elliott Smith or Chopin or even any other artist that you would like me to analyze how the borrowed chords work. Originally I wanted to break down and analyze this whole song, but I'll probably save that for another video in the future. For now I'm gonna just analyze one chord change. The C, that's a C, to the B7, and then to the A minor. So it's Alameda shuffling your deck of trick cards. Okay, so let's analyze this in relation to the circle that we've built, the rule of thirds circle. You can see that we're doing the rule of opposites here. The B7, when you break it down, it's really a B major chord and a D sharp minor chord put together. So it's like, and that is very clearly in the key of B major. So we borrowed a chord, we jumped from the key of C major and briefly into the key of B major, borrowed this chord, and jumped back into the key of C major. And the reason this works is because the B7 chord has a voice leading path to A minor. First of all, B7 has an A in it, so it has a common tone. And then it has 2 notes that lead. An F sharp leads chromatically to a G, and the D sharp leads chromatically to the E. So without getting too much into jargon, the B7 chord is also called a secondary dominant. It's a dominant which is the 5 chord of a chord that's in the key, but it's not the tonic, in other words the C major. So there's the 5 of the 2, the 5 of the 3, the 5 of the 4, not the 5 of the 1. And what that means is the B7 is the 5 of E. Let's count up from 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this also works in minor, even if we're in E minor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the 5 is always the same in minor or major. We're borrowing the B7 from the E, which is the 3 of the C major scale. C, D, E. 1, 2, 3. Like, think about this. B7 to E minor, or B7 to E major. So doing the 7th chord of the 5th note always resolves back to a 1, and the 1 can be either a major or a minor. I know that's confusing. Maybe just rewind that and repeat it a couple times and see if you understand it. But in this case, we're resolving to the 6 of C major, which is the A minor. And we're just really scratching the surface of borrowed chords. The one thing I want you to take away is this rule of adjacent chords and opposite chords. And to introduce tonal variety, you're going to move to the opposite ends of the circle and back. And there's a lot of tricks to it. I really want to go into it more, but this video is getting really long, so I'm gonna end it right here. So if you like this video, I'm going to be analyzing more songs. I'm gonna be analyzing Frank Ocean, Radiohead, Elliott Smith, and Chopin in relation to these concepts. And I'm gonna be going over the song chord by chord change by chord change. If you like that, comment below. Maybe comment another song with borrowed chords you'd like me to analyze. Like and subscribe, and check out my other videos on music, art, and coding. Thanks for watching.